Yeah, vielen
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to be here. Very good talk we just saw, and it fits very well with what I'm going to tell you because based on the discussion I had yesterday, I changed my talk a little bit. So I'm not going to touch in detail on the ideologies, but I'm starting with the question about democracy, and we've already heard a lot about that just right now. So I think basically the thinking in generational terms is always a bit problematic. I think we're going to hear more about that in other sessions this afternoon. But passing knowledge of historical experiences, I think, is crucial. And that's why I'm very happy to be at this Republika. At the same time, of course, generations aren't uniform. It's about how we reflect on our own history. And without talking too much about myself, but just so you get a basic idea where I'm coming from, I'm interested professionally and also personally, especially the times between 1870 and 1930 and in the late 60s, early 70s. I grew up in Heidelberg, especially the late 60s were quite interesting there, so maybe you can see. I have a connection to Latin America, and in the 80s I was in the cyberspace techno discussions and activism there. And I spent a lot of time in East Berlin early on, working at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, the KIT, on transhumanism, and have done that in the 80s and 90s before it was called that. I think if I look around, if I'm Generation X, I'm probably one of the few leftists there. So it's important for me when we talk to each other that it's clear how I look at the world. I'm starting from the attempt of a story of liberation, starting from the Paris Commune, the 1917-1920 revolution, then Stalinism, fascism, and the Cold War that I grew up in. These new 20s, maybe to touch on the Cold War, still not quite clear for myself up to this day is how we got into the situation. Also in the Cold War, for example, I'm not clear on, since the 90s, it's become okay to say West good, East bad. I was never a big friend of the Soviet Union or anything, but comparing West Germany with East Germany is a bit silly. Looking economically, socioeconomically, you have to compare Haiti with Cuba or Nigeria with Kazakhstan and so on. So it doesn't make sense to me. From my background, I think there's a loss of historic consciousness. And these new 20s, I don't know how you feel about it, but to me it feels like a pretty big disaster. First we had a pandemic, then the war in Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, Trump. So far this year has been going great. And I think we all feel it, and also I hear it from my contacts into conservative citizens as well. Everybody's kind of feeling the pressure. So I'm going to touch on social media, not saying technology is bad, but the people who control technology are also not necessarily evil, but they have an agenda that aims to destroy our liberal society.
I'll do this. I'll just say that Marxist thinking is quite necessary. It's not no means outdated. You have base and superstructure. On the base, it's like since the early 70s we had the wealth inequality. We had the best phase of the socialist states, best of the phase of the capitalist states. We had the best North-South relations and the best hope for the liberation movements. My work is informed by the opening rift. We have the largest inequality in the EU, we have precarization of work, we have a weakening of the labor movement that was glorified as the as a liberation of work, and where the we had we can see that we still have we destroyed the historic memory of the oppressed. You can see that you can make a lot of jokes about East Germans and proles and all these kind of things. He was interested about this. It's a little shocking. We have little consciousness about this history of our own country. I'm not on any side. Maybe I'm maybe on the left of the Social Democrats. These are decisive moments of the story, like Red Ruhr Army, for example. I changed the talk a little about because I saw Megadal, Neubauer, and others yesterday. They called up for the liberal factions of the CDU to come together to defend against the fascists. And my formulation that the anti-fascists and democratic forces must get out of the ideological trenches of 1914 to 91 as quickly as possible. And we really need an inclusive narrative of 20th century. And if you saw the embarrassing appearance of Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht in the Bundestag about the war, then the way they did this in such a cheap manner, it's really bad. We need my plädoyer is that we need an inclusive narrative, and we need to bring together the democratic factions.
I have two more slides that will show some very ugly images about racism and violence. So if you don't want to watch that, maybe just listen to this. We're moving out of the ideological trenches. For the conservatives, that means, as Luisa Neubauer yesterday said, what are compassion and mercy, especially for the ones who are fleeing from violence? What is about respect for the creation and the environment? This is the symbolical image from the Bible on the left, and on the right something that for me, I'm interested in that identification between the white worker, so the whites and the workers, and especially from a politician from the German left. They have a bit of a cult of personification, and what's usually left out of this discussion is that the liberals, we're talking about the liberal democracy here. In my heart, I'm also a liberal. I'm usually mean left liberal with this. I don't mean the German Liberal Party in this case, which is more right-wing. And they've sort of rested on their laurels since the reunification in the 90s. And this usually horrifies me because I have a bit of an anger towards these issues, although I see them as an ally sometimes. So many, when I say liberals, I mean many U.S. Democrats, the Greens, and most of the Social Democrats. And the question is, does the rest really stand for freedom? Do we reflect with regards to the people outside of the liberal West, aside from the Cold War? The Frankfurt School is usually in danger of producing calendar quotes. So the images on the top, you can see how natural rubber is being used, and that was used in the industrialization in order to create tire. And there was an industrial consortium backed by King Leopold of Belgium that tried to create a government in Congo, and they put up some quota that were inhumanly high, and the punishment for not meeting the quota was taking their hands. And on the bottom, you see the queen of the neoliberalism, Margaret Thatcher, here with Pinochet, who bought his power by destroying the workers' unions. And if we reflect this history, if we want to have a unified narrative, we need to have something to have liberal, conservative, anarchistic, non-fascist forces. We need to unify and retell old stories, and this is difficult, especially in this time where the younger generation has to deal with these. They have to deal with so many of these stories, and they haven't grown up with this. And it's not something that has vanished, but that are being retold in a very one-sided way. And in 1990, when the capitalism won, there was a very West-centric retelling of old stories. We just talked about the mechanism market economy. On the right, you can see it's a little blurry. This is Thiel and Musk, and on the bottom, you see the people that were bought into power by those two. So you have to really ask if this really is democracy, if Thiel and Musk can buy Trump the presidency. And they are now controlling a large part of the military-industrial complex. And I can recommend you this book on the right, The Jakarta Method by Vincent Bevins, if you're interested in human rights. It's about how people who were suspected of communist tendencies and have been killed, and we're usually very outraged about human rights violations, but even up until the late 80s, a lot of these atrocities were committed by the West. And the boss of Palantir, someone I want to talk to you about later, who said that capitalism and the rise of the West is not due to the values that they purport, or their ideas, but rather their systematic application of violence. And this is something that's forgotten in the West, but will never be forgotten in other parts of the world. And what the conclusion he's taking from that in his new book, Technological Republic, is that we need to have more methods of surveillance and fighting back in order to defend the West. And anti-totalitarianism is something I grew up with. We said brown equals red is a legitimization of the fascism. I'm very well versed in the history and for example, the history of China, and it was obviously horrible what happened there. And this equation that we've been told is wrong, but this is what happens if you have a policy of education in schools that has a very strange retelling of history in school. Then you have things like Adolf Hitler was a leftist, which is obviously bizarre. And then you see here, end of history. I'm no longer asking. This is something I hear a lot if I travel outside of the West, and that I perceive there's a discontentment with the point that the West will end at some point, and especially the exceptionalism of the USA, but it's not coming about fast enough. And some of these challenges, I want to now look at my work. We're doing policy consulting and estimating the effects of new technology. And the question is, how can we still have a working state in this environment? And what we see when we talk about neoliberalism, this is basically an extension of what we had in the past, but it's actually destroying the foundations that the government needs to work. So, for example, the neoliberalism wants to reduce the state, but what that means is that you have these horrible things that we have in the U.S. You have suppression of LGBT, trans people, and, for example, for leading wars. So there's also a book that I just read that was probably written by ChatGPT, and I'm sorry, I missed the title. It says that there are new ways that we can use for solving it, but they're actually horrifying. And in the past, we saw a lot of propaganda against the East, especially the GDR, and now someone like Thiel says democracy and capitalism doesn't work together. Thatcher once said that there is no such thing as society. And we now realize that this is not just something that was said, but that is actually being acted upon, that workers' unions are being dissolved and fought against. They're trying to destroy all of this administrative part of the state that is necessary for keeping up a working government. And there are these freedom cities that they are trying to have outside of U.S. law, that try to create their own enclave where they have their own rules. And then all these platforms for hate speech that they're pushing. And this is definitely a different quality. This is not quantitatively different than before, but also qualitatively. If you think back to Chile, where there was a democratically elected government that was destroyed by the U.S. with fascistic totalitarian methods, and now fascism is actually a regular instrument of policy for them, and openly, quite condescendingly towards their electing base. For example, that these MAGA people will just openly spout racistic things, and for us this is disgusting because we still have Jewish BIPOC people, and we like them, but still they can be incited for violence. And if you want to read Yavin, then you can think about we're the dark elves, we're the dark elves of the liberal establishment, and we have the fascist hobbits of our foot soldiers. And I'm saying this on purpose. I really enjoy Tolkien, but this is a very strange confusion of the layers. I mean, all of they're using the iconography of Tolkien, like the Palantirs, for example. So I wanted to dive deeper into the ideologies of these things, but the talk we just heard before already said all of that. You can still try to rummage through that a little bit in the continental roots of this that they use with regular frequency. They try to draw ideas from this, and what I find interesting, these people are all highly intelligent. Usually a lot of people are suffering from this, the US, Argentina, Chile, all of these man boys, I'm not sure what the German expression for this is, in very infantilized male youths who have a daddy complex. And if you look at the biography of Musk, then you understand a lot. And he has as an epitaph that he wants never in therapy. And you have already seen the image before. These are the people who went to the techno parties that he organized illegally. And he didn't actually party with them, but played computer games. So these are people that made up this culture. I don't want to idolize them, but they didn't really understand it, and they had this brilliant idea that you could earn money while doing something on the internet, which everybody knew back then, and they're now at the levers of power and create a lot of issues for us. And I work a lot with transhumanism. I'm definitely not going into my favorite topic, which are the roots of this topic. So you just have to believe me or look it up, that this is a quasi-religious utopian ideology that at its core has technology in order to manifest our destiny as humankind. We're overcome our bodies and escape to the space, and this has socialist roots. And the same is for the stock. The he's doing a continuation of the Communist Manifest. This again, what is characteristic about this fascism is that it's completely unoriginal. The ideas that it's using and abusing usually come from left liberal kind of ideas, and if you look at the foot soldiers of the MAGA movement and the German right wing, then in 2,000 years we're gonna go to Mars. This sounds, as a child of the space age, this sounds like a very attractive idea. Maybe you're gonna be invincible, if you're gonna be supernatural, you're gonna use our conscience and can put that into a robot and it can go to space. And this is something that this wave of the MAGA movement is something that an idea that they're pushing, and it sounds attractive, and it's the last thing that's still left. Carp is also taking apart effective altruism, and they're trying to have better lives for a large amount of people, which is also something that you should be skeptical about, because it's very hostile to disabled people. And about these people, they're harking back to the most extreme form of neoliberalism. All of these people that are very anti-democratic, very anti-communism, anti-left. Leo Strauss is a very interesting speaker. He was inspiring the neocons back in the day. Carl Schmitt, the famous German who was important for the fascism, but also for the right-wing post-Nazi regime Germans. And then there's a cult of acceleration against the soft bodies and for machines, but also Nietzsche, Walser, Karp. But I want to just quickly recommend some texts that you can look into. Dark Enlightenment, from Nick Land. He's basically saying it's neoliberalism on speed, which is taken quite literally if you think of Musk. And in the 90s, he created an ideology of the acceleration where people will destroy the Communist Manifest because that is liberation. And he's now also, he said in China, but he's now arrived the US. And there's Curtis Yarvin, who started off as a blogger, and he also wrote the text Dark Enlightenment, which is very interesting to read. And there's also a smaller oligarch, who's Mark Andreessen, the Techno-Optimist Manifesto. It's a statement of belief that technology is everything you need, and it's a very short text, but it has a very long list of references of neoliberal classics and a few fascists, and pretends that he's being anti-fascist within the text, but this is kind of ridiculous. So this was the ideological landscape that we're looking at, and at the core I put a summary down there for this. So you need unleash capitalism and technology. You overcome democracy forever. They're complaining about how the election results were bad because of universal suffrage, and they basically said for 10 years they would want just men voting. And then another thing that's very interesting that we need to have our eye on, this obsession with the communism, the cultural Marxism that they're talking about. Harris, Obama, who they've always saying were among them. And then usually don't dare touching Marx, and at the core they're seeing that my colleague Jenker was saying that from the distribution of wealth, we're at a similar spot as just before the French Revolution, and the feeling that their regime is basically threatened by that situation, and that this could topple them at some point. And the idea is that you have superhuman, you have a cult of the genius again, these highly intelligent people, engineers usually, sometimes businessmen, they should rule as technocrats. And as Curtis Yarvin says, there shouldn't be states, there should be smaller units like a company of a CEO. And this is very problematic if you think of if you don't want another war. So, for example, the space race and the fight about space and the transhumanism.
So what are the challenges? Well, our societies aren't... so the new capitalists need to become philosophers because our societies are too enlightened for capitalism to just take place behind our backs, and but they can't reveal the secrets of the entire business, the ecological and social unsustainability of capitalism, and the inevitability of imperialist wars. They vacillate between often clear-sighted analysis of the situation and desperate ideological pipe dreams. But basically, I warn in front of this, before this, take this seriously, but they can't, they can't reveal their dirty secret, and that this isn't. They jump between. Yeah, I already said this. We say we sit in our fortresses, our fortress Europe, our fortress of of prosperity. Within our fortress, the democracy won't survive. So we have to stop this regime of terror at our borders, and that means that we have to come to terms seriously with our past and not in a symbolic way. And we need to find appropriate, modest place in our world. So what do we do? We need a new democratic narrative. We need against the oligarchic production of ideology, and they talk to they speak to these men, and we can't continue this liberal blurring of history. We need to radical democratization, especially in companies, but also in the public sector, on the level of the early Brandt years, and we need socialization and of Amazon and big social media platforms. We can't. We need to. It's Trump also talked about social media as Mark Zuckerberg as the owner of a realm. So this to the end, it's not about CDU. I have a lot of friends there who even hate the AfD more than I do, and we can't ignore the democratic middle class, and we need an alliances of like Fighters for Future and the trade unions, for example. Last sentence, we can't continue. We get hints from the global south. The globalization of the West needs to be opposed. We can't just criticize only capitalism, imperialism, and the regime of terror on the borders, but we need a fundamentally unreasonable relationship with technology.